Good morning. It's great to be here and great to be a part of something that's historic. It is the first time that this conversation is taking place, and I didn't realize there would be bright lights here, so I feel like I'm really on TV today. But there are many of you I see out in the audience that I've put you on TV or will in the future. But it's great to be here. I have a great panel, and I want to introduce them. I didn't think I would be up on the same table, so if I don't ask the right questions, they can push me off the side. But I thought I would be there, but I am here. Let me introduce our panelists as a part of this conversation. To my left, Mary Gable served as the Assistant State School Superintendent for the Division of Academic Policy and Innovation for the Maryland Department of Education. And I've known her in many other roles. She was a former director of high schools and also a principal in this county. Next to Mary is Gina Jacobs, President of the Maryland Association of Boards of Education, a member of the Prince George's County Board of Education. She's also known in the legal community, having practiced law in Maryland for 15 years here in this state, both in the area of private law, family law, labor, employment, personal injury. I could go on with the list, but she is one who is able to put both education and law together. And to her left is Dr. Maxwell. I just call him Dr. Maxwell. He calls me Reverend. He's the chief executive of the Prince George's County Public School System, formerly here in Anne Arundel County, also as Maryland Superintendent of the Year this year by the Public School Administrators Association of Maryland. And on the very end is Betty Weller, a middle school English and science teacher who's also head of the Maryland State Education Association, and we're so glad to have all of them with me. Their bios are much longer, but I want to give an idea who we were dealing with. So, we're talking money. That's a conversation that gets everybody's attention. Not enough of it, need more of it. Where do we find it? As I start this conversation, I want to talk about the Tooten Commission and the Tooten funding, and that's where we'll start today. And I'll ask the panelists, what do you see as the successes and legacy of the Tooten funding? And I think I remember covering protests just to get that money. Let's talk about how this has worked out. You can all raise your hand at the same time.
I'll start. Most of you probably know that what we commonly refer to as Tooten is actually the Bridge to Excellence Act, which was passed in the early 2000s based on the Tooten Commission study, which was an equity and adequacy study for Maryland Public Schools. And we think that that money, that act has provided us with the opportunity to be very successful. We've talked about the fact that for 5 years we were ranked #1 by Ed Week in American Public Schools. It has allowed us to make growth in NAEP scores, 4th grade reading and math improvement, 8th grade reading improvement. We've been a national leader in AP performance for years, and we attribute a lot of that to the fact that we have made education a priority in Maryland. It's also allowed us to implement full-day kindergarten, pre-K for economically disadvantaged kids. We've allowed principal training so that we have stronger leadership in our buildings. We've put in student health programs for children who are hungry. We've developed more career clusters so that high school students could explore different careers. I mean, the list goes on. What we see now is that over the years, while we've been successful with Tooten, there have also been efforts to slow down the inflation factors and things like that. And so the success is moving forward, I think, going to be tempered by the fact that we are not going to keep up with what we originally intended. Some of the formulas have been changed. While that is probably may have been necessary at the time, some of the factors in public schools have changed. We have a more diverse student demographic. We have mandates that have come down that were not there when Tooten was originally passed. We have federal mandates that have come down. So I think while we've done really well, we need to be careful that we are not going to fall behind. We've got to look at ways to update what we've done and make sure moving forward that we have adequate funding.
Let me let you all weigh in on this as we get out the gate. I have some questions before me, but I'm the moderator, so I may go off script. But in terms of being able to use Is it something that, and I'll look at you, Dr. Maxwell, because as superintendent and CEO, you're playing with the dollars you're having to make them work. Your insights on Thornton.
So I think on the legacy piece, I think the acknowledgement by the state of Maryland that it takes different amounts of funding to deal with the needs of children with different needs was very, very important. And I think that it is as true, if not more true today. Kids come into us in different readiness levels with different kinds of issues, and it costs more. I mean, from special needs kids, for example, some of them need just a little bit of service. Some of them need non-public placements, which are quite expensive. And so there's a vast difference between the level of funding required there and what we receive from the federal government has never been adequate since Public Law 94-142 went into effect, mandating special education services across the country. It hasn't been adequate to pay for those services. And so locals are always making up the difference between what it costs and what we're funded. So that's on the legacy piece. In terms of what it means, I mean, the money goes into the general fund, and it, as Betty said, it pays for lots of different things. It's not just like this is it, and if we didn't have it, this would go away. It pays for salaries, it pays for class size, it pays, for programs. And I think that one of the striking needs in Maryland is to be able to recruit, to train through professional development, and retain teachers in our state. We have historically not produced the number of teachers in this state that we need. And so we're always an importing state. So we're always in that sort of competitive market where finding enough teachers, to the thousands of teachers a year that retire in this state and move on, our universities fall way short of producing those teachers. And so competitively paying teachers in salary and benefits is an important thing for Maryland. It's not like we have, we got plenty of people. We don't have plenty of people, and we really need to make sure that we're very competitive in the marketplace in order to have the highest quality teachers.
I'm going to move on to Gina. Ms. Jacobs, you certainly deal with a lot of boards of educations, and you still hear about Thornton. You still hear the stories. Are you hearing that this was kind of the foundation? What are you hearing from even all of these boards of educations that you deal with and you represent?
Sure. So if you look across the state of Maryland, all 24 school districts absolutely see that funding is a priority for the children. And one of the things that I think is really critically important is that we all look different and we look alike in many ways. So I think the legacy, if you look at it, Maryland outpaced every other state around socioeconomic status and readiness for kids, and that was made available through Thornton funding. So Thornton funding looked at the differences of the local counties and said, what funding is necessary for Prince George's County, Baltimore City, Baltimore County, Kent County. And I think what happens with Thornton is that it looks at the opportunities for kids who otherwise would not have the ability to be readiness, whether it's pre-kindergarten, whether it's career and technology opportunities for students. And so Maryland looks very different. We're small but mighty, and I think all 24 districts have a story to tell around how how Thornton funding has helped.
Mary, in your title is innovation. That's a part of the long title. From the state perspective, how do you think, in terms of legacy, how has it worked for Thornton from where you guys sit?
I think a couple of points that I wanted to make. We know that the Thornton Commission, as has been explained, was 2001, 2002, but I think what we don't realize is that we did not feel the full implementation of the Thornton dollars until 2008. So it was in 2008 that was ratcheted up each year. So actually, I think I've kind of listed here, it's our present 7th graders who have been in school since the implementation of Thornton. So although our students who are in the upper middle grades or middle school grades or in high school have benefited from that part of Thornton. It was really those children who started in kindergarten in that 2007-08 school year that started with that full implementation of Thornton that started a number of years earlier. Secondly, I think the point that I really want to just hit again, prior to Thornton, local superintendents like Dr. Maxwell received funding in certain buckets, in certain columns, and the money was to be spent in that area. And as has been said, it is really the superintendent, it is those folks in their local school systems who really know the needs of their community and really need to take that funding and spend that funding as is needed in their school system. With the overview of we need to make sure we're taking care of poverty children and children in special education, but that was a major shift. That flexibility, not telling local school superintendents exactly how you need to spend the funding, but more, in fact, looking at another piece that we haven't talked about is looking at standards, because it drew together and said to our school systems, what are our goals, what are our standards, what is it we need for our students? Right now we're talking about them being college and career ready. And if there are goals and if we need to reach their goals, then there are standards for that performance, and the funding then needs to be tied to those standards. And we then need to demonstrate how it is we're meeting those standards for our children. So I think those two things. And then the third thing is, in addition to Thornton, what was then required of Thornton was that 10 years later, we were going to stop and take a look at where we are. And so that's what we are in the process of right now in terms of the adequacy study, which is being conducted, and looking at what has occurred since Thornton. Was that an adequate level of state funding 10 years later? Is it adequate to do what we said it was going to do, which was to meet those standards?
There's some other topics on money, and so I probably won't let each of you give an answer, but I'm going to play TV here. I'm going to move it along a little more. This is one that's always kind of hard to explain on TV. GCEI, Geographic Cost of Education Index, one of the more debated parts of Thornton, and certainly challenges as well. How does it fit into the conversation as it relates to where we're going from here? And I'll just kind of throw it up in the air and let one of you guys grab a hold of it, and then the next one will come around to you.
So first, the Geographic Cost of Education Index was designed to acknowledge that there are costs outside of the control of local school districts that affect the cost of education in those districts. And it is a little complicated to understand, but there are certainly definitions out there. It is the only part of Thornton funding that is discretionary. It has been funded for the last 8 consecutive years. And we are concerned, rightly, I think, that the funding for GCI, we're sort of reading and hearing things that say that perhaps it will not be funded going forward. It is, again, a general fund source of revenue for school districts. And in Prince George's County, it's over $39 million in funding that helps us with our needs. That translates for, what does that mean? It means over 500 teachers probably at salary and benefits, which would dramatically raise class sizes and hinder our ability to provide the education in Prince George's County that we need to provide to our children. So it's a big figure. I would say that even for some of the smaller districts that don't receive that amount of money, it's still a significant portion of their budget. So you can look at money and say, well, that's a pretty small number, but those are much smaller districts, and so their budgets are much smaller, and they have many less children than the 128,000 that we have in Prince George's County, as an example. So I think it's been a real help to districts in order to provide high-quality teachers, to lower class sizes, and to provide some targeted instruction to children.
I want to ask you a different question, if that's okay. And that is, as we talk about the other side of the coin for education funding, the capital budget, school construction. What are some of the challenges? We hear a lot about that. It's going to be a hot topic, I think, coming up in the session. But again, from where you sit, dealing with all the boards of education, how do you see that coming together? I mean, budgets, school construction, brick and mortar.
Yeah, so boards of education across the state struggle with that issue every single year. It's a high priority. So when we think about kids being ready, when we think about whether or not our children are going to be prepared for the next iteration, if you will, of Common Core standards and what's required for testing, the buildings in our school districts, many of them have been built before 1960, and between that time frame. And so we have to be more collaborative. We have to be creative in that conversation. It's a big ticket item, but it's also a high priority. So what I would say about that is that we absolutely have to look at Maryland has proven that it puts education as a high priority, and what goes along with that is the capital funding. So in some districts, $2.1 billion in need, and you get not even close to that, $29 million, $39 million. And so there are also some school districts that in their preparation for testing, for park assessments, do not even have the infrastructure for technology. So technology has to be part of that conversation, and we do have to, as a state, come up with more collaborative and creative ways to meet that need, and it has to come from both local and state.
The technology piece is important. I want to address that to you, Betty, because it was mentioned about the new testing. Not everybody has. I've got 2 phones and an iPad and some other stuff that my daughter's helped me operate. But you talk a lot with the teachers across the state, the readiness. And so I'm going to move to that issue of investments, not only safe and modern classrooms, but as was mentioned, technology. Where are we, and how does that become a part of the conversation, you think, in terms of money?
Well, clearly technology is the wave of the future, and we try to make sure that students have equal opportunities to learn about and use technology, because that's going to be what they're going to be doing when they grow up and get jobs. But all things are not created equal. There are some districts that are much farther ahead with providing devices, using them in schools, and that sort of thing. We're trying to bring everybody up to speed in terms of teachers knowing how to incorporate technology in their classrooms and using it, to making sure that students know not just how to text messages and things like that, but how to work with editing and writing on a device of some sort, because that's what they're going to be doing on the park tests. There are areas of this state that are not as far in terms of bandwidth and things like that. So we have a lot of work to do. And the other thing about technology is, as soon as you get used to it, it's out of date. It's not something that's going to go away. It's going to be a recurring issue, and it's going to keep changing. And we've got to make sure that we provide our students with what they need to be successful, and that includes technology.
And some of these we may revisit, because I know that we have an audience that just can't wait to ask you questions that Tim Tooten does not have. When it comes to Race to the Top, I got a chance to cover that recently. The competition, we got the money, and there's some talk that it's almost gone. Is that what I hear? Anyway, in terms of that $250 million, how is school funding linked to it being able to be sustained as some of these programs? We know that's used for a lot of different things. Mm-hmm. And from the state perspective, is it almost done?
It is.
Okay. How has it worked in terms of?
Race to the Top brought to Maryland in a competitive way, and we applied for that, $250 million. Half of that, $125 million, went to our local school systems through the looking at certainly the kinds of things that we've already talked about, the size, the poverty level of children in the different local school systems. The other $125 million was overseen through the state and state projects But much of that money also went to our local school systems through grants that were part of our state projects. So just talking a little bit about what was that, first the timing. Race to the Top was a 4-year grant. And we are now in the 5th year of that because they gave us an opportunity to do a no-cost extension. By no cost, it meant you're not going to get any additional money, but you may use some of the monies which you have determined that there needs to be some further work on. But that 5th year was very targeted in that it was only specific projects. A number of them have been completed, and some of them still need work and implementation. As has been mentioned, we have been in an incredible time in education, not only in Maryland, but across the state, in that we have implemented new standards of curriculum. We are fully implementing a new assessment this year. We've implemented a new teacher-principal evaluation and all the pieces that go with that. So just in terms of infrastructure and technology, there were 4 areas that Race to the Top really looked at. It said, very simply, we need to make sure that we have all the standards and the assessments in place to make sure our students are college and career ready. Secondly, we need to make sure we have that technology in place to provide the infrastructure in order to bring our students and our assessments and curriculum along. We need to make sure that we have the best teachers and principals in our schools. And we also need to make sure we take care of those schools that are low-performing schools. And what are we going to do to ratchet up, attract highly effective teachers and principals to those buildings, and what are we going to do? But to go back to the question and kind of keep in there and add Race to the Top to it, specifically with infrastructure, specifically with technology, I do want to make the point that when we talk about technology, we frequently talk about assessments, and we're going to give these assessments online. But please know, we can't take students and give them an assessment online that throughout the school year that technology has not been an integral part of instruction. So we have to take a look at our classrooms and our teachers and our schools and our school systems and say, do we have the infrastructure? And then do we have the professional development for our teachers that is needed in order to use all the technology that we have? And are we using it on a daily basis with students so that we can fully assess them properly and really determine what it is they do know, they are able to do, and what are their needs by integrating that instruction with that technology with instruction. But it is a challenge. We did do a survey of all of our school systems to determine where they were and what their needs are. But it is an expectation for the state, and a challenge, but for our local school systems to make sure that they are working to have what's needed in their schools.
Could each of you weigh in on this? It kind of came back to technology again, and in terms of how you've been able to spend the dollars, have you felt them? You felt like maybe you didn't get a chance to use it, but just your conversation, Betty, on the teacher standpoint. I know you guys face challenges anyway in terms of how does technology working in with this, how does it change how we teach, how kids are learning?
Well, I think the first thing that needs to happen for it to really change is that you have to have enough technology in a building so that it's not just a computer lab that's being utilized for many weeks of the school year for assessments for students. There has to be time for students to go to a computer lab or have a computer lesson in their class, however they do it, so that they learn how to use the technology. That's the whole point. We're not there yet. Most schools and districts, I think, are still working to provide those devices. And then once you have enough devices for technology to be really integrated into instruction, teachers have to know how to do that. You know, the new teachers coming out today probably know that very well. Somebody like me who started a number of years ago may not have quite those skills. You know, we go, like you go to your daughter, we go to the younger people to help us with the technology. So we've got to bring everybody up to speed. But it is what our young people are going to be dealing with in the future. So we have to make sure not only that we're prepared, but that we're able to prepare them.
Dr. Maxwell, as you look at your budget and you're certainly superintendent CEO, in terms of where all this lines up in your budget, I mean, you would love to, if you got a nice lab here, how do you spread it? Whether it's race to the top money, whatever it is, how do you get enough of what you need? And I'm sure a lot of persons would relate to that from where you stand.
So I think like most districts, I'm pretty sure all districts really in the state, we did an assessment of our facilities when the new directions came down about the new park assessments and the online testing environment. You know, which buildings were wireless, which ones weren't wireless, how many computers do we have available, and are they the right type of device for the test? There were conversations at the beginning, would they be tablets, would they be laptops, you know, what kind of system do you need? And so we used that as a starting point. And again, I know other districts did the same work. And then we began a process of going from school to school and outfitting our schools with a wireless environment and providing the routers, the switches, the access points, and the ability to remotely work on them. All of those systems had to be upgraded. And so all of our schools are now wireless. We ran our first test last spring where I know it doesn't exactly simulate the whole testing environment, but we threw a switch and turned them all on at one time, you know, so that we didn't have some sort of meltdown thing on the first day that we're trying to use them. And we have another test scheduled for January to, again, make sure that we're getting where we need to be. There's not enough facility capacity to set up enough labs for all of the children that need to be tested, so we've been moving to mobile labs that are on a cart. They come in different sizes, and you can, you know, move them around the school as you need to do that. But I think, you know, we sort of mapped out a strategy that, you know, this is the date by which we need to be able to do this, and how do we position ourselves so that we have all the equipment and all the infrastructure that we need. And we really feel like we're there.
Now, Gina, there are folks you talk to who say we're not there, and say that Dr. Maxwell is doing great compared to maybe some of the smaller districts, those that might be challenged a little more. What are you hearing in terms of, we have computers, we need more, do we have the money, is it anywhere close?
So we're really looking forward to, our delegation last year passed legislation that asked for a work group to talk to them about what do you think the needs are relative to park assessments and really being prepared. And what I think we know is that we're not ready. We're not there yet. And so some of it has to do with technology. You know, you have to think about it. 24 school districts are thinking about school safety. We're thinking about lower class sizes. We're thinking about how do you best meet the needs of students who are considered to be disadvantaged, to make sure that they get where they need to be. And so I think that while some districts started early and have had the opportunity, whether it's through E-rate, to get a better sense of their technology needs, others have not been in that place. I mean, we have districts in the state of Maryland that don't have Comcast and don't have Verizon and don't have access. And so we cannot leave those districts behind. And what that translates into is leaving those students behind. And so this is a critical issue. So when we're talking about school construction, again, that conversation has to do with the buildings, it has to do with safety, it has to do with technology, and they all play a key part in student success. And so from the perspective of the Maryland Association of Boards of Education, we don't feel that the school districts are there yet.
And you've heard that. Mm-hmm. And what do you tell them? Hang in there. Let's fight. We're on the same page. And that may be in your area. You're the state, so I'm just throwing you out there. But anything state, I'm just saying, give it to Mary. You can solve it.
Well, I think that we agree that it is a challenge, and that our schools and school systems are not there, is where we totally want to be. Have we made progress? Absolutely. Are there more technology? We certainly heard about the actual computer or laptop, and as Kevin said, what is it that we need to buy? Because 3 or 4 years ago, when we knew Park was coming and superintendents were trying to ratchet up, trying to get the definition of what it is would be needed, because it was not a smart move to go and buy a whole lot of something when that something turns out to be not what was going to be able to be used. So that's the issue. And then the bandwidth. That being said, there have been a number of grants that have been part of Race to the Top, in particular, since we were talking about that earlier, that have provided specific funds to the local school systems that have been used to purchase hardware, but also technology upgrades to be able to do such things as to provide formative assessments for students so that students can be assessed prior to the summative assessment and determine and get feedback in time, as opposed to getting feedback at some point later in the date or having to do it by hand, but to be able to, through instructional strategies, to be able to assess our students, find out their needs, find out, and then provide the appropriate instruction and meet their needs right in the classroom and do that. The state does not have the funding in the budget that we ask for, that we go through the Department of Budget and Management and through the governor. It is a partnership. We do know that state and local school systems are together trying to meet this need, and it is a continued challenge that we'll continue to work towards.
We've done a lot of time on this issue. I'm just thinking whether or not it's question time. I'm looking for my cue. If it's time to take questions. If not, I can continue this conversation. I'm sure that you have a lot of questions you want to ask that maybe would not be on my list. So maybe we can shift to that. Is it just one? Oh, no, there's more than one. Good. All right. So that way, we can at least start maybe a similar conversation. Please discuss your cybersecurity efforts. And can parents opt out? Oh, well, there's a couple questions. So let's talk about cybersecurity. And that might be something that would be along your lines. Dr. Maxwell, maybe about efforts that maybe both local and state are doing as it relates to.
So I think Mary certainly can talk from the state perspective, but I mean, we're all running, systems to keep our, and I'm not the biggest, but I mean, we have quarantine fees. We send out, warning systems. We start seeing these phishing scams and all those kind of things. But I mean, our systems are pretty robust. I'm not going to say it's not possible, but we work really, really hard to make sure our systems are, armed with the latest, software that we can buy to keep our data segregated, I guess, from the broader internet, and then we try within the organization to keep certain pieces of data in different systems that are, again, separated even more from the broader system that we have.
And while this might be, a money issue in terms of what does it cost to get, I guess, those firewalls and those things that might protect your labs and computers, what are you hearing from the state level, Betty, in regards to what your people are saying? You have access, but protecting that.
I haven't heard too much about that yet because not everybody has given park assessments and that sort of thing. I know that most school systems now are using online report cards and things like that. And I don't know that they've been challenged yet. Although when I listen to the news about all the hacking that's going on, and it's pretty darn sophisticated hacking, it is a little bit concerning. When we have student data there and we don't want students to get in and change it, we certainly don't want anybody else to get in and use it. So I don't know what systems are doing, but I do suspect that they are making every effort to build security that is as close to impenetrable as possible.
And on that same vein, another question says, can parents opt out of online testing data collection? I get calls, people say, you know what, I don't think that they can get my kids' records. They think maybe the worst of this, but what the question is, can parents opt out on online testing or data collection? I'm guessing that, at least from the beginning, not everybody has the technology.
I can answer some of that. I don't know that I can answer all of it. Just to say we operate under laws, we operate under FERPA, and I don't know that I can tell you exactly what this letter stands for because I wasn't thinking about that before the meeting, but it's making sure that we maintain the security of systems of student data. I can tell you I'm not a technology expert, but being part of many conversations, we do have, we talk about encryption and making sure that this is regarding student data and also teacher data. Is important now to make sure that we have the proper systems in place. When we built the infrastructure regarding Race to the Top, one of the first priorities is how were we going to deal with the security. There are rules of which we can do. So just in a very simple example, if I'm a teacher and I'm working with my 25 students, I can work with and see the data related to the performance of those 25 students. I cannot go and see the rest of the students in the school or students in another school. So will the principal be able to look at the data? But we build security systems to ensure that that data is protected and that someone who does not have the proper security clearance, I'll use that word in quotes, only certain ones can go to certain pieces of the data. And we're obliged, required, expected to protect students and to protect their data and also do the same for our teachers in terms of systems or data going from one place to another. So all that is part of it. Part of it, the requirement is to assess our students. We look to making sure that we meet the standards of instruction, and then we assess students on that. Right now, in a temporary time, the new assessments can be given in paper and pencil, but over time, that transition within a couple of years is to go totally to online assessment, and we need to assess our students. We do everything that we can to protect that. In particular issues, we'd have to deal with separately, but.
The questions are coming in. That's great. This one, I'll start with you, Mr. Jacobs. If you could change how the current formula works, how would you address the disparity between counties that have better local funding access and those who struggle to make MOE, which is let me get my technology together here, okay, maintenance effort. That's a real hot topic, and so I'll start with you on that, but these are straight from the audience.
Sure, so let me just first say, since the opportunity has presented itself, that GCEI funds 80% of students in this state. So GCEI students, 80% of our students do benefit from that. In terms of disparity and equity issues across the state, so prior to 2012, the Maintenance of Effort law that helped to clarify how it works, in 2011, $250 million was underfunded in the state of Maryland relative to maintenance of effort. Half of that came from one county and then dispersed throughout. So I think in terms of dealing with the equity issues, GCEI is a good thing for Maryland because it does allow an opportunity to fund for those counties who have to whose cost of doing business is more. But there are also other provisions for low wealth states that may not benefit from GCEI that the state does provide for, and those are more complicated in terms of how that happens, but that does currently exist. So what I would say is that we have to identify our students based on needs in every single county. And boards of education have to be willing to jump out there and take the risk and say, we are going to fund our budgets and approve our budgets based on the needs of our students. Sometimes that's controversial, but it also comes down to how do we raise the level of achievement for all of our students, and sometimes that requires that local boards change the way in which they approve their budgets. And so from the state perspective, what I would say is that we need to continue to fully fund education. We need to include the pre-kindergarten students in the formula itself. We know that when maintenance of effort was first, when Thornton was first discussed, that pre-K was part of the conversation. But where we are today, we need to make sure that they're included. We know that early childhood education is most important in terms of student success. And so I think when we're talking about equity issues, counties have to look at where they are individually and fund their budgets to meet those needs accordingly.
I think you all have been reading my questions already because you're right on topic what I've been getting from the audience. Did you want to add to that?
When Thornton came in and the state said we're going to give additional money to public education, part of the original reason that maintenance of effort came in was so that districts didn't essentially reduce their budgets and use the state budgets to sort of pick up the costs. And so there was an expectation that districts were going to maintain their effort. That's what maintenance of effort is about. And it is a constitutionally mandated service to provide an adequate education to the children of this state. And while I understand, the sentiment around some of those and the way we use the word equity in different questions and different statements, the reality is you can't fund a world-class, high-quality education like we're being asked to do in Maryland with below-average budgets. It costs money to provide high quality. And so maintenance of effort was designed to make sure that when these fluctuations in the economy come up on a fairly regular basis, that our education systems are protected from those variations so that our children can have the kinds of services that they need.
I think that dealt with one of the questions I had that was given to me that really addressed that issue, which moves me now to another question. What types of school and local government functions can be combined to cut costs? Maintenance, administrative, accounting, planning. And I know that you on leave, Betty, from a school system, but you hear all kinds of conversations about if we just cut this or cut that. What are you hearing and what types of things? I know you deal with everybody local. What can we do? What can we trim if there's fat?
Well, I think that's a district by district issue because I don't know where they've already made combinations. I know Howard County did a great job of that. Where it can be done, it probably could and should be done, but I think we also have to be careful that we're not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You're going to cut, and pretty soon you're doing just the minimum instead of, as somebody said a while ago, budgets ought to be set based on the needs of the system and the students and not based on, well, we're going to give you this much money, you make it fit in.
All right. Someone brought the question, and it relates to Prince George's County. Used to have pre-kindergarten programs for low-income children, but had to cut back to a half-day budget constraints. Have you been able to restore some of the full-day programs? Just last week, I guess there was a $15 million grant, at least the first part of it that came from the government regarding expanding some of these programs. What are you hearing on the state level in terms of how this might play out, at least the first year, is $15 million. Some of the systems are getting money, some are not. But again, what are you hearing? I'm looking at you, Mary.
I know you are. I'm looking at Kevin.
Because I just this past week I did a story on one of those grants and kind of where do you put it. Parents love that for a lot of reasons. But that's one of the most exciting classes I've ever gone into are the pre-K kids.
Yeah.
Can I just say?
Yes.
So let me just say this. So putting on my Prince George's hat for a moment, Prince George's County went through 3 consecutive years of $100 million in cuts. And the unfortunate thing to that was that we cut full-day pre-K to half-day pre-K. And I can tell you that the data bared out that decision absolutely impacted kids. And it did not impact kids in a way that was helpful. So we saw that kids lost ground because when you cut pre-K, we know that early education is necessary. So we've been able to, whether it was through, our county executive has a program, the Transforming Neighborhoods Initiative, and in that process, we were able to shift dollars to re-upped pre-K full day. And so each year, 1 year prior to Dr. Maxwell getting there, and then each year that he's been here, we've been able to now go back to full-day pre-K in many areas, and I think that's a great idea, and I think it's the best decision.
So I can pick on you again, Mayor. This is a different question that might, if I go off stage, you all know why. Knowing that Smarter Balance has assessments that better meet the needs of ELL and disadvantaged students, is Maryland doing anything to correct the deficiencies of the Park assessments?
That's an interesting question. I do know that Maryland did join a consortium in particular to address our needs and to partner with other states for ELL. In the past, prior to that, we had developed assessments for students, and ELL students, and many of you are aware and may not be aware, are assessed also additionally on language, on their acquisition of language and their ability to take that language and apply it to academic settings. So we have a growing number, I think Betty said this at the very beginning, of ELL students, and we have joined that consortium so that we can work with other states and enhance our programs that we provide for ELL students. In particular, regarding the question of Smarter Balance meeting the needs of ELL versus Park, I cannot respond in particular to that. I do know that we, through our federal programs related to Title III, which provides programs for our ELL students, providing equity, excellence, and efficiency, as you know, is the three priorities of our state superintendent, Dr. Lowry, and part of the equity is making sure that we meet the needs of our ELL students, which are growing. And I do want to go back to the kindergarten, and I just, just personally, which we don't usually talk about, I'm now a grandma, and it's just wonderful, but I challenge everyone to think about the children that you know, and think about those children who you know getting ready to go to school, and think about the advantages that some of our children have and some of our children do not have. And that's why this pre-K and kindergarten is so important for our children, because what they lose early on is very difficult to make up. So it is a budget item, and we talk about it from a budget perspective, but I really challenge all of us to think about children who have such few words in their vocabularies opposed to the vocabulary that many of our children have that you know, and when they go to school, makes a difference for our children as we make sure that they are ready to read and are reading and prepared.
Let me go back there. I love the questions that are coming in. This takes us back to something you can all address. Do you believe that GCEI should remain discretionary or be converted to a formula?
I think it should become part of the formula.
Anyone else want to? Oh,
We all agree on that, I think.
that's an amen. All right. Okay, how are we supporting teachers who are the go-to, who are preparing students? And I'm guessing what this is saying is those who, well, I guess they all go to, right? But how do we prepare, I guess, teacher support? Betty, just sort of from your end, I know that you guys talk a lot about coming alongside.
We do. I firmly believe that we get a lot more bang for our buck when we're talking to each other and collaborating, and that includes with MSDE and MABE and the other organizations. For MSEA, we know that our members have a lot of concerns about being proficient at developing SLOs and things like that, and we actually wrote 2 grants to NEA last year. One was for assistance with Common Core. We wanted to have our members trained in each affiliate so that they could help train their colleagues on Common Core standards. And then we wrote a second grant for SLOs to do essentially the same thing. And we got over $500,000 in grant money from the NEA so that we could help our members, because MSDE has limited capacity and we have limited capacity, but if we work together, we increase that somewhat. So while our members are now telling us that they are professionally developed to death. They also recognize that they need to understand the standards. They need to understand the new teacher evaluation systems. They need to understand what the PARCC assessments are going to look like. They need to understand the new curriculum that's coming along with everything. So it's very overwhelming right now, but I think that we are working. It's going to take time, but we are working to try to help where we can.
There are other questions coming in, and I'm moving along for time's sake. If there's no money coming from Race to the Top, or it's run out, why is Maryland implementing a new teacher principal evaluation? Is it additional cost to the district? Is it putting a burden on employee time? That's one issue we've not talked about. The whole evaluation piece. And I guess this question is, if these funds are done or about done, does the burden fall then back on the local systems? Yes, any of you could pick that up.
Well, the teacher principal evaluation has had funding that has developed the program since the start of Race to the Top. We have been moving in that area. I've just read a whole report actually last night on where we are with teacher principal evaluation. But that has been the local school systems in working with the state. We have all of our Race to the Top LEAs that have approved teacher principal evaluations. And Betty and I were there at the very beginning, and I remember, and I've said this to her just the other day, reminding that we agreed very early on that professional development would be that foundation of what we do with teacher principal evaluation. The local school systems have really done an incredible job. It has been a heavy lift without question. Lots of dialogue and communication and thinking and rethinking and going back and looking at where we need to be for professional development to support that we make sure we're looking at professional learning at the same time looking at student growth. One of the reasons that we did ask for this additional year, and I think all the Race to the Top states, for example, with the exception of one, did that, was because our local school systems, our teachers, our superintendents say, can you continue to provide this professional development? Can you continue to provide the support? And teacher principal evaluation, it was exactly one of them that we did ask for an additional year. We have given grants. We just had a meeting on Friday regarding the grants that have gone out to the local school systems to support the initiatives that they have, to support the technology that's in place, to support the professional development. We discussed the additional grants that need to go out, which are tied to a local school system applying for that funding and saying, again, it's like what we've discussed, not here is the grant and you must do this with it, but in the area of teacher principal evaluation, we just talked about a third of the LEAs have already submitted their application. The others are about ready to submit their application for how they want to use those grant funds to support teacher principal evaluation so that that infrastructure is there and that we continue. We still as a state, just because certain Race to the Top is over does not mean that our responsibility in working with our local school systems and providing that support and providing that professional development. All that we've done for the past couple of years is looking at, for Race to the Top in particular, is to move away from that as a grant, but to say, what are we doing as a state? How does it fit in with our goals? And what are we doing to sustain this work? You cannot put, or should not put, funding or resources, time and effort into any initiative that you then say, done. What we need to do is to be thinking about what and how are we going to sustain this work. We ask all the time, at the state level at least, who is going to be sustaining that? Through what resources do we already have? Do we need additional resources? How are we going to do that? And like everyone, I think we all are challenged to take a look at the work that we do and say, all the work that we're doing, is this all the work we need to continue to do? Is this all the right work? Do we need to refocus some of our work to provide support as we make sure our students are college and career ready, and we have the excellent teachers and principals that are in our schools in order to do that. And also to prepare them to work in some of our more challenging schools. And that's one of the things that we've done with professional development or with mentoring. What are the skills that are needed to work in some of our more challenging schools, or our schools that have demonstrated that they have not performed to the degree that we want? What can we do to support them and provide those particular skills to those staff that are there?
Gina, if you could weigh in on this as well as Dr. Maxwell on the whole principal-teacher evaluation. When this first was developed, it was hot, controversial, like most topics are. But what are you seeing from where you guys are as to how that's playing out and how it might continue?
So I would say that, first of all, we all get evaluated in our work in whatever function we have. So whether it's our regular day job, we get evaluated. It's the what and the how. So I think for teachers, and what Prince George's County started some 3 years ago in terms of shifting around the teacher evaluation process. What I think is important here is that teachers feel that this is not a gotcha process, that this is professional development, that it is, we are here to help you, that there's mentors here to support you when you need it, and to provide a process for boards across the state through their superintendents working as a team for teachers to be able to feel that not only am I meeting the needs of my students, but my needs as a teacher are being met when I am short in meeting those needs. So I think it's also important to note that, particularly around the PARCC assessments, there's been a 2-year delay that passed last year for teacher evaluations being tied to those assessments. But let's be clear that assessments are not the only factors that teachers should be evaluated on. And so I think that that 2-year delay, and of course, MABE, we then advocated very strongly that 2-year delay also apply to students. So, so to answer that question, I think that funding cannot be the question around it necessarily. It has to be, how do you make this work in a way that teachers are getting what they need from a mentoring perspective? And I think there are different ways across the country, quite frankly, where school districts are being very creative about providing teachers the opportunities to be mentor teachers and at the same time stay in the classroom, go to those hard to staff areas and those hard to teach subjects, and support our teachers. I mean, I think that this is a profession that isn't for everybody. If you have the right evaluation process in place and teachers feel that they have access to mentors, I think they themselves will help to dismiss themselves from a profession that may not be for them.
Dr. Maxwell?
So just a couple of additional points. I mean, they've said a lot of really great things about the process and the work. First, the collaboration with, between superintendents and their teams and teachers associations has been, for the most part, I think a very, very positive part of the work. And I think that it's in all of our best interests to have the most highly qualified, capable teachers in our classrooms as possible. And I think our associations understand that, and certainly we understand that. And the focus needs to be on professional development. That said, the changing of evaluations is pretty typical in lots of industries. As times change, evaluations are updated. That hasn't always happened in education. And just as one example, and then you can go where you need to go there. When I returned a year ago, August, to Prince George's County, the evaluation system that they still had there was the one that I was evaluated on when I first started teaching there in 1978. It was time for an upgrade, an update.
All right. A few more questions are coming in, and just keep an eye on the time. The question is, would it be feasible to tap some of the big corporations, venture capitalists, private funders, to help boost the local security of some of the districts who are strapped? Or even better, to utilize foundations, GoFundMe sites. In other words, something outside of traditional budgets. How do you all feel about that? I'll start with you on the end.
With me?
Miss Betty.
The first thought that came into my mind when you read that question was, what strings are attached? I mean, I think if corporations were willing to give money to help secure schools, That'd be a great thing, except that I don't know what they're going to ask for in return.
Any other person want to weigh in on that? I mean, is there money out there from foundations, from private corporations who are willing to invest in local schools?
There are, and again, it does depend partly on what the strings are, but I think there are a lot of organizations that support the work of public schools. You know, we've had for a number of years, for example, a principal pipeline and support work with the Wallace Foundation. Just as one example, we do some work with the Panasonic Foundation. I mean, there are lots of organizations that provide support for schools.
As we look at budgets, someone said, when a school system's budget is comprised of employee costs between 75 and 80%, how do you include or provide a high quality education with only 25% of the budget? I think in most corporations that the employees, benefits, et cetera, and many of you have done budgets. I'll start with you, Dr. Maxwell. How do you?
So I think, first of all, I think the number's low. I'm not sure who wrote the question, and I don't need to know, but I actually think the costs are more to the 80, 85, 87%, perhaps when you talk about salaries and benefits. But I don't think that's necessarily out of line with a lot of companies and corporations. We're not running an assembly line and producing, you know, widgets at the end of that. You know, we're very labor intensive. I mean, we need a teacher for every, you know, it depends on what class we're talking, whether we're talking about the size of pre-kindergarten class or whether we're talking about orchestra and band in high school. But we're a very labor-intensive organization, and I think that when you've got high schools of a couple of thousand kids and you have a couple of hundred teachers, that's appropriate. I mean, and they cost money, and they should cost money, and high-quality teachers should cost us money. But I think that you know, I think that when we start talking about how do you get quality education when that much money is, the high quality education comes from the teaching staff and the principals and the educators in your schools. That is the high quality education.
Anyone else want to weigh in on that question about, is it pretty common as we look at budgets that's the way it works?
It's the people. The people in any organization have to implement and execute the plan and the goals. I think what's really key when you're talking about funding, how funding is best used, is that you also have to reassess and reevaluate. So that's why data-driven decisions matter. That's why having performance management in place to determine whether you're meeting the goals and meeting the needs of your students and your population is critical. So at the end of the day, people make the organization what it is. And we need to be more, we need to make sure that our funding is evaluated in a way that when that's not happening, then we might need to make some differences in the people that are doing it if that's the case. So I think, again, I think those are the standard costs associated across organizations, but it's critical to make sure that we are evaluating that.
In terms of questions, I want to make sure that we have not left anyone out. Maybe you're still writing your question. We'll take any more. There's some other ones. One I want to just throw in here in terms of, we talked about corporations and money and funding. As we begin a new year here in Annapolis, what are some of the efforts that are taking place to lobby for more money? I think of school construction, they changed the name. It's not Begathon anymore, but it's another thon. But in terms of what are some of the strategies, and don't show me your whole card, as you prepare to make the best case for more money for your district, for the state, et cetera. And each of you would just address that. I'll start with you, Mary, and then I'll.
Well, I think that what we need to take a look at is what is what are our major mission? What are we charged with accomplishing? Where are we? Where do we need to, how far do we need to get? And in order to be there, what are we going to do? We started out early on talking about technology. You need to make sure that you're maintaining that technology, maintaining that infrastructure. We are in a student business and an instructional business, a large, in order to assess students and make sure that they're meeting those standards, there are costs associated. So I think that we obviously go through that process of preparing our budget and taking a look at where are we, and at the same time understanding that money it's not out there for the giving for whoever asks. We need to demonstrate success. We need to demonstrate what it is we have accomplished and how we can accomplish it and how we are going to continue to accomplish it and what is it that our superintendent, our state board has determined are priorities in order to move that forward. So I think in any kind of proposal that we put forward, we have to put forward, I know that we're challenged by our state superintendent to do that and our state board to make sure that we demonstrate what it is we need, what it is we've accomplished, where do we need to go, and what it is that we need to get there in order to support our local school systems.
And on that same vein, after you did address that question, but a new one just came up, we face a dismal budget forecast. What advice do you have for Governor Hogan and the legislature also where to fully fund education? So I'll just pick up, it's in the same vein, best strategies, your advice, and there again, don't play your whole card, but there's not much to go around. Gina?
So here, let's just be upfront about what we all have all seen in the media, what we've all, we're all tense about. The reality is that education in Maryland has been a priority. And it's been a priority for not only Democratic administrations, but for Republican administrations. It is a priority in the state of Maryland. And I think that what we have to do is to really be sure, upfront and real about what the fiscal situation is, but at the same time, I can tell you that MABE continues and will continue to support a robust level of school funding. We support that pre-kindergarten be included in that formula. And how we do that, we're not naive. We're not saying that, you got to do more with less. I think my own superintendent a few days ago said we need to stop saying that. So our advice is let's really have a collaborative conversation about what the needs of students are. At the end of the day, our state will continue to be successful, and sometimes people still have heartburn around this 5 consecutive years of being #1. But the reality is, children who were living in conditions of poverty showed across the board in our districts that were suffering, they showed the level of progress. That doesn't happen in a vacuum. It doesn't happen just because. It happens because we put our money where our mouth is, and we have to support students that need it, not just students in conditions of poverty, but also students who need more rigor. And so at the end of the day, education is a priority in this state, and it has to continue to be a priority in this state for us to move forward, whether that's business, whether it's economic development, whether it's environmental, whatever it is, education is #1 in that. And so if we use that as our focal point, I think we'll get there.
All right, I have, I think, 3 minutes, so being the broadcast guy, I'll take, to be able to close that off with Dr. Maxwell. Betty, you'll close it out with us. In terms of advice for the administration, budget, et cetera.
So I agree with Ms. Jacobs, and I did say that, it's a myth that you can do more with less. You can do less with less. That's just the way that it is. And so if we want to do more, right, if we want to maintain, right, if you want to maintain, you have to maintain, and the funding comes with that. If you want to do more, then you have to pay more. You don't get, more with less. What I think, the focus needs to be, again, as Gina said, we have benefited, I believe, from one of the better state school systems, school districts in the country. And it doesn't benefit anyone, Republican, Democrat, Independent, you name it. It doesn't benefit anyone to go backwards from that and to become less. No one should want their legacy. I don't think anyone does want their legacy to be, we got worse under my watch.
Yeah. Betty, I think you have the last words.
Oh, boy. Well, I think the question for me is how much less education can we afford? We have said we don't want to leave any students behind. We don't want your zip code to matter in terms of your education. We've made great strides in Maryland. When I go to national meetings, we are the envy of many of the states in this country because they think we just have dump truck loads full of money that pull up and dump money on education. And I said, well, we just have people who realize how important it is. We all know that as far as investing in education, you get the best return for your dollar when you do that of anything else. Forbes just put out a great article on, yes, education's expensive, but wow, look at the return you get. So I think we need to determine what our priorities are. If we want to continue to educate all of our children and to meet all of their needs and to attract highly qualified and highly effective educators to classrooms, then we have to put our money where our mouth is.
We've had a great discussion. Thank you for some great questions. The audience, give yourselves a hand, first of all. And our panelists, give them a hand as well for their insight. And thank you very much.